Oh, exhausted that female is me. Not so young now. Will she come here tomorrow? Wait for her somewhere forever. Mustn't come back. Murders do. Will I? Mr. Bloom with his stick gently vexed the thick sand at his foot. Write a message for her. Might remain. What? I some flat-foot tramp on it in the morning. Useless. Washed away. Tide comes here. Saw a pool near her foot. Bend, see my face there, dark mirror, breathe on it, sisters. All these rocks with lines and scars and letters. Oh, those transparent. Besides they don't know. What is the meaning of that other world? I called you naughty boy because I do not like him. Ain't no room. Let it go. Mr. Bloom faced the letters with his soup. Hopeless thing sand. Nothing grows in it. All fades. No fear of big vessels coming up here. Except against his barges. Around the kitchen days. Done half by design. He flung his wooden pin away. The stick fell on silted sand, stuck. Now you were trying to do that for a week on end, you couldn't. Chance. We'll never meet again. But it was lovely. Goodbye, dear. Thanks. Made me feel so young. Short snooze now if I had. Must be near 9. Liverpool boat long gone. Not even the smoke. And she can do the other. Did too. And Belfast. I won't go. Race there, race back to us. Let him. Just close my eyes a moment. Won't sleep, though. Half dream. It never comes the same. Bat again. No harm in him. Just a few. Oh, sweetie, all your little girl white up I saw dirty beside gentleman to love sticky with two naughty grace darling she him half past the bed met him pike hoses for illies for all the perfume your wife black hair heave under him bones in your young eyes move plump bubs me brie and winkle red slippers your rusty sleep wonder years of dreams return till indigent with swoony love he showed me her next year and drawers return next and her next her next. A bat flew. Here. There. Here. Far in the gray bell chimed. Mr. Bloom with open mouth, his left boot sanded sideways, leaned, breathed. Just for a few cuckoo. The clock on the mantelpiece in the priest's house could wear Canon O'Hanlon and Father Conroy and the Reverend John Hughes S.J. were taking tea and soda bread and butter and fried mutton chops with ketchup and talking about cuckoo. Because it was a little canterbury that came out of its little house to tell the time that Gertie McDowell noticed the time she was there because she was as quick as anything about a thing like that, was Gertie McDowell. And she noticed at once that the foreign gentleman that was sitting on the rocks looking was cuckoo. Degio holds Amos. Send us bright one, light one, horn, quickening in one fruit. Send us bright one, light one, horn, quickening one fruit. Send us bright one, light one, horn, quickening in one fruit. Hoops a boy hoopsing. Hoops a boy hoopsing. Hoops a boy hoopsing. universally that persons human is esteemed very little perceptive concerning whatsoever matters are being held as most profitably by mortals with sapience endowed to be studied, who is ignorant of that which the most indoctrinated, and certainly by reason of that in them high minds ornament deserving of veneration constantly maintain, when by general consent they affirm that other circumstances being equal by no exterior splendor is the prosperity of the nation more efficaciously asserted than by the measure of how far forward may have progressed the tribute of its solicitude for the proliferant continuance which of evils the original, if it be absent, unfortunately present, constitutes the certain sign of nature's uncorrupted benefaction. For who is there who anything of some significance has apprehended but is conscious that exterior splendor may be the surface of a downward tending ludicrous reality, or on the contrary anyone so is there unilluminated as not to perceive that as no nature's boon can contain against the bounty of increase, when it behoves every most just citizen to become the exhortator and admonisher of assemblables, and to tremble lest what had in the past been by the nation excellently commenced might be in the future not with similar excellence accomplished, and in reckoned habits shall have gradually traduced the honorable by ancestors transmitted customs, so that thither profundity that one was audacious excessively who would have the hardihood to rise, affirming that no more odious offense can for anyone be than to oblivious neglect the consignable simultaneously command and promise, which on all mortals with prophecy of abundance or with diminution's menace that exalted every ill-ratedly procreating function irrevocably enjoined. It is not why therefore we shall wonder if, as the best historians relate, among the Celts, who nothing that was not in its nature admirable admired, the art of medicine shall have been highly honored. Not to speak of hostels, leper yards, sweating chambers, plague graves, their greatest doctors, the O'Shields, the O'Hickes, the Ulysses, have sedulously set down the diverse methods by which the sick and the relapsed found again health, whether the malady had been the trembling withering or loose boycott of flux. Certainly in every public work which in it anything of gravity contains preparation should be with importance commensurate, and therefore a plan was by them adopted, whether by having preconsidered or as a maturation of experience. It is difficult in being said which the discrepant opinions of subsequent inquirers are not up to the present congrued or render manifest, whereby maternity was so far from all accident possibility removed that whatever care the patient and that all hardness of woman hour chiefly required, and not solely for the copiously opulent, but also for her who, not being sufficiently moneyed, scarcely and often not even scarcely could subsist valiantly, and for an inconsiderable emolument was provided. To her nothing already then and thenceforward was anyway able to be molestful, for this chiefly felt all citizens, except with proliferant mothers prosperity at all not the can be, and as they had received upon God's mortals generation to befit them her beholding, when the case was so having itself, parturiently vehicle through carrying desire immense among all one another was impelling on of her to be received into that domicile. O thing of prudent nation, not merely in being seen but also even in being related, worthy of being praised, that they her by anticipation when seeing mother, that she by them suddenly to be about to be cherished had been begun, she felt before born bliss babe, had within womb one he worshipped. Whatever in that one case done commodiously done was. A couch by midwives attended with wholesome food reposeful, clean swaddles as though forthbringing were now done and by wise foresight set, but to this no less of what drugs there is need and surgical implements which are pertaining to case, not omitting aspect of all very distracting spectacles in various latitudes by our terrestrial orb offered together with images, divine and human, the cogitation of which by strong females is to tumescence conducive all reasons issue in the high sun bright well-built fair home mothers wherein, ostensibly far gone and reproductive, it has come by her thereto to lying, her term up. Some man of wayfaring was stood by a house door at night sun coming. Of Israel's folk was that man that on earth wandering far had fared. Stark truth of man his errand that him alone led to that house. Of that house Ahorn is Lord. 70 beds keeps either teeming mothers or one that they lie for to thole and bring forth bairns. Hail, so God's angel to Mary quoth. Watchers tway their walk, white sisters and ward sleepless. Smarts they still, sickness soothing, in 12 moons thrice and 100. Truest things they twain are, for horn hold and will rise ward. In ward wary the watcher hearing come man mild hearted effort rising would swire you impled to him her gate wide under. Lo, 11 leaping lightens in eye blink Ireland's westward welkin. Full she drave that God that all mankind would fordle with water for his evil sins. Christ's rude maid she on breast and him drew that he would raise him fair under her thatch. And that man her well wotting worthful went in Horn's house. Loath to her can Horn's tall hat holding the seeker stood. On her stow here was living with dear wife and loathsome daughter that then overland in the sea floor 9 years had long I wondered. Once her in town had meeting he that her bow had not doffed. Her to forgive now favored with good ground that her allowed that of him swift seeing face, hers, so young then had looked. Light swift her eyes kindled, bloom up blushes his word winning. As her eyes then on get his weed sword therefore sorrow she feared. Glad after she was then her dread was. Her he asked if O'Hare doctor tidings sent from far coast, and she with gramful sigh him answered that O'Hare doctor in heaven was. Sad was the man that word to hear that him so heavy and in bowels ruthful. All she there told him, ruing death for friend so young, Algate so unwilling God's right was to say. She said that he had a fair sweet death through God his goodness with mass prized to be shriven. Holy house ill and sick men's oiled limbs. The man then right earnest asked the nun of which death the dead man was died, and the nun answered him and said that he was died in Moan Island through belly crab 3 year agone come children, and she prayed to God the all ruthful to have his dear soul and his undeathliness. Heard her sad words, inhaled hat sad staring. So stood they there both the while and wan of sorrowing one with other. Therefore, every man looked to that last end that is death and the dust that gripeth on every man that is born of woman, for as he came naked forth from his mother's womb, so naked shall he went him at the last for to go again. The man that was come into the house then spoke to the nursing woman, and he asked her how it fared with the woman that lay there in child. The nursing woman answered him and said that the woman was in throes now full 3 days, and that it would be a hard birth unto to bear, but that now in a little it would be. She said thereto that she had seen many birth women, but never was none so hard as was that woman's birth. Then she set it all forth to him, for because she knew the man that time was had lived nigh that house. The man hearkened to her words, for he felt with wonder women's woe and the travail that they have of motherhood, and he wondered to look on her face that was a fair face for any man to see, but yet was she left after long years and made. 9-12 blood flows chiding her childless. And whiles they spake the door of the castle was opened, and there neighed them a mickle noises of many that sat there at meat. And there came against the places they stood a young learning knight Michael Dixon. And the traveller Leopold was to him sith, and it had happed that they had had to do each with other in the house of misericordium with this learning knight lay by, cause the traveller Leopold came there to be healed, for he was sore wounded in his breast by a spear wherewith the horrible and dreadful Dragon was smitten him, for which he did to make a salve of volatile salt and chrism as much might suffice. And he said now that he should go into that castle for to make merry with them that were there. And the traveller Leopold said that he should go there with her, for he was a man of cause and suit ill. Also the lady was of his avarice and was prevalent, not though she tried well that the traveller had said thing that was false for his subtlety. But the learned knight would not hear say nay, nor did her mandament any of him aught contrarious to his list, and he said how it was a marvellous castle. And the traveller Leopold went into the castle for to rest him for space, being summer of them after many marches and environing in divers lands in some time venry. And in the castle was set a board that was of birchwood of Finlandian that was upheld by 4 dwarfmen of that country, but they durst not move more for enchantment. And on this board were frightful swords and knives that are made in a great cavern by swinking demons out of white flames that they fixed them in the horns of buffaloes and stakes there bound marvellously. And there were vessels that are wrought by magic of my hand out of season and the air by warlock with his breath that he blazes into them like the bubbles. And full fair cheer and rich was on the board that no white could devise a fuller any richer. And there was a vat of silver that was moved by craft to open in the which lay strange fishes withouten heads, though misbelieving many that this were possible thing without the sea and natheless in their soul. And these fishes lying in oily water brought there from Portugal, and because of the fatness that therein is like to the juices of the olive press. And also it was a marvel to see in that castle how by magic they make a compost out of fecund weapons out of trouty that by aid of certain angry spirits they do into it swells up wondrously like to a vast mountain. And they teach the serpents there to entwine themselves upon long sticks out of the ground, and of the scales of these serpents to brew out a brewage like to mead. And the learning not let pour for chilled Leopold a draught and help thereto the while all they that were there drank every each. And chilled Leopold did up his beaver for to pleasure him, and took apparently somewhat in amity, for he never drank no manner of meat which he put by an allen full privily he voided the more part in his neighbor glass, and his neighbor nis not of this while. And he sat down in that castle with them to rest him there a while. Thanked be Almighty God. This meanwhile this good sister stood by the door and begged them at the reverence of Jesu our Althor liege Lord the leader wassailing, for there was above one quick with child, a gentle dame, whose time hid fast. Sir Leopold heard on the upfloor cry, and he wondered what cry that it was, whether of child or woman, and I marvel, said he, that it be not comer now. Meseems it dareth over long. And he was wearing saw Franklin that hight laid a hand on that side of the table that was older than any of the t'other, and for that both were knights virtuous, and the one in prize, and eke by cause that he was elder he spoke to him full gently. But, said he, for it be long will bring forth by God his bounty and joy of her childing, for she hath waited marvellous long. And the Franklin that had drunken said, expecting each moment to be her next. Also he took the cup that stood before him, for him needed never none asking nor desiring of him to drink, and, now drink, said he, fully delectably, and he quaffed as far as he might to their both's health, for he was a passing good man of his lustiness. And Sir Leopold that was the goodliest guest that ever set Scholars Hall, and that was the meekest man and the kindest that ever laid husbandly hand under him, and that was the very truest knight in the world, one that ever did minion service. The Lady Gentle pledged him cordially in the woman's woe with wonder pondering. Now let us speak of that fellowship that was there to the intent to be drunken they might. There was a sort of scholars along either side the board, that is the witty Dixon Michael, Jr. of St. Mary Immersibles, with other his fellows Lynch and Madden, scholars of medicine, and the Franklin that hight Lenahan, and one from Alba Longa, one Crotlehurst, and young Stephen that had mean of a friend that was at head of the board in Costello, that man clap and punch Costello all along of a mastery of him ear while jested, and of all of them, reserved young Stephen. He was the most drunken that demanded still of more mead, and beside the meek Sir Leopold. But on young Malachi they waited for that he promised to have come, and such as intended the no goodness said how he had broke his vow. And Sir Leopold sat with them, for he bore fast friendship to Sir Simon and to this his son young Stephen, and for that his languor becalmed him there after longest wanderings, and so much as they feasted him for that time in the honorablest manner. Ruth read him, led on with will to wonder, loath to leave. For they were right witty scholars. And he heard their resounds each general others touching birth righteousness, Young Madden maintaining that put such cases were hard the wife to die, for so it had fallen out a matter of some year while gone with a woman of a blind in Horn's house that now was trespassed out of this world in the self night next before her death all leeches and apothecaries had taken counsel of her case. And they said farther she should live because in the beginning, they said, the woman should bring forth in pain and wherefore they that were of this imagination affirmed how young Madden had said truth, for he had conscience to let her die. And not few and of these was young Lynch were in doubt that the world was now right evil governed as it was never other, albeit the main people believed it otherwise, but the law nor his judges did provide no remedy. A redress God grant. This was scant said, but all cried my claim, nay, by a virgin mother, the wife should live and the babe to die. In color whereof they waxed hot upon that head with argument, not for their drinking, but the Franklin Linehan's drum each went to pour them ale, so that at the least way mirth might not lack. Then young Madden showed all the whole affair and said how that she was dead, and how for holy religion's sake by red of Palmer and Bedesman and for a vow he had made to Saint Dalton of Arbac and her goodman husband would not let her death, whereby they were all wondrous grieved. To whom young Stephen had these words following, murmur, sirs, is eke oft among lay folk. Both babe and parent now glorify their Maker, the one in limbo gloom, the other in purge fire. But, gramercy, what are those odd possible souls that we nightly impossibilities, which is the sin against the Holy Ghost, very God, Lord and giver of life? For, sirs, he said, our lust is brief. Means to those small creatures within us, nature has other ends we. Then said Dixon Jr. to Punch Costello West he won't ends. But he had overmuch drunken, and the best word he could have of him was that he would ever dishonest a woman so she were a wife or maid or limit if it so fortuned him to be delivered of spleen of lust head. Whereat Crotters of Albalonga sang young Malachi's praise of that beast the unicorn, how once in the millennium he cometh by his horn, the other all this while, pricked forward with their jibes wherewith they did mouse him, witnessing all and several by saying foulness his engines that he was able to do any manner of things that lay in man to do. Thereat laughed they all right kindly, only young Stephen and Sir Leopold, which never durst laugh too open by reason of his strange humour, which he would not bewray, and also for the rude for her that bare so she might be or wheresoever. Then spake young Stephen Orgelus of Mother Church that would cast him out of bosom, of law of canons, of Lilith, patron of abortions, of bigness wrought by wind of seeds of brightness, or by potency of vampires mouth to mouth, or, as Virgilius saith, by the influence of the Occident, or by the reeking moonflower, and she lie with the woman which her man has but lain with, effectus circuito, or peradventure in her bath, according to the opinions of Averroes and Moses Maimonides. He said also how at the end of the second month the human soul was infused, and how in all our holy mother foldeth ever souls for God's greater glory, whereas that earthly mother which was but a dam to bear beastly should die by cannon, for so saith he that holdeth the fisherman's seal, even at blessed Peter, on which rock was holy church for all ages founded. All the bachelors and asked Sir Leopold would he in like case so jeopard a person as risk life to save life. The wariness of mind to answer filled all, and, laying hand to jaw, he said dissembling that his wound was, that as it was informed him, who had ever loved the art of physic as might a layman, and agreeing also with his experience of so seldom seen an accident that was good for that mother church bell, like at one blow had birth and death hence, and in such sort deliberately he escaped their questions. That is truth, party, said Dixon, and, or a pregnant word, which hearing young Stephen was a marvellous glad man, and he averred that he stoleth from the pool leaneth to the Lord, for he was of a wild manner when he was drunken, and that he was known that taking it appeared eftsoons. But Sir Leopold was passing grave maugre his word, because he still had pity of the terror causing shrieking of shrill women in their labour, and as he was minded of his good Lady Mary, and that had borne him an only man-child, which on his 11th day I lived had died, and no man of art could so dark as destiny. And she was wonder-stricken at heart, for that evil happened, for his burial did him on the fair corselet of lamb's wool, the flower of the flock, lest he might perish utterly and lie killed, for it was then about the midst of the winter. And now Sir Leopold that had his body and a man-child, for ne'er looked upon him his friend's son, and was shut up in sorrow for his for he passed happiness, and as sad as he was that him failed a son of such gentle courage, for all accounted him of real parts. So grieved he also in no less measure for young Stephen, for that he lived riotously with those wastrels, and murdered his goods with whores. At the present time young Stephen filled all cups that stood empty, so as there remained but little of the Redemptor had not shadowed their approach from him that still plied it very busily, who, praying for the intentions of the sovereign pontiff, he gave them for a pledge the vicar of Christ, which also, as he said, is vicar of Bray. Now drink we, quoth he, of this mazer and quaff ye this, which is not indeed parcel of my body, but my soul's bodiment. Leave ye a fraction of bread to them that live by bread alone. Be not afeard neither for any one, for this will comfort more than the other will dismay. See ye here. And he showed them glistering coins of the tribute and goldsmith notes, the worth of £2.19 that he had, he said, for song which he read. They all admired to see the foresaid riches and such earth of money as was hereof before. His words were then these as followeth: Know all men, he said, time's ruins build eternity's mansions. What means this? Desires went blast the thorn tree, but after it becomes from a bramble bush to be a rose upon the root of time. Mark me now. And woman's womb word is made flesh, but in the spirit of the Maker all flesh this becomes a word that shall not pass away. This is the post-creation. Omnis caro veni. No question but her name is Puison, who aventura in the dear chorus of our admire, healer and herd, our mighty mother and mother most venerable, and Bernardus saith aptly that she hath an omnipotentia de praise supplicum, that is the wit, in almightiness of petition, because she is the second even she wanted. St. Augustine too, whereas that other, our grand dame, which we are linked up with by successive anastomosis, and the word sold us all, seed, breed and generation, for a penny pippin. But here is the matter now. Or she knew him, that second I say, and was but creature of her creature, Virgin Mare, figlia dito figlio, or she knew him not, and then stands she in the one denial or ignorancy with Peter Piscator, who lives in the house that Jack built with Joseph, and the joiner patron of the happy demise of all unhappy marriages. Parsicem leo tags omnis de q quiel avad mes dan set fixed position c8a osicur pigeon, venture to do. In Twitter transubstantiality odor consubstantiality, but in no case substantiality. And all cried out upon it for a very scurvy word. A pregnancy without joy, he said, a birth without pain, a body without blemish, a belly without bigness. Let the lewd with faith and fervor worship. With will we withstand, with say. Here upon Punch Costello dinged with his fist upon the board, and singer body catch taboos to bail about a wench that was put in pod of a jolly swashbuckler nominee, which he had straightways now attacked. The first 3 months she was not well. Taboo, when here nurse quickly from the door angrily bid them his ye should shame you, nor was it not meet as she remembered them, being her mind was to have all orderly against Lord Andrew came for, because she was jealous that no ghastful turmoil might shorten the honor of her guard. It was an ancient and a sad matron of a sedate look and Christian walking, and habit done beseeming her crimson wrinkled visage. Nor did her hoarded of one of effect, for incontinently Punch Costello was of them all embraided, and they reclaimed the churl with civil rudeness, some shaken with menace of blandishments, others whiles they all chode with him. A murrain seized the dole. What the devil would be at, thou chuff, thou puny, thou gotten peace straw, thou losel, thou chitterling, thou spawn of the rebel, thou dicotrop, thou abortion, thou the shut his drunken drool out of that like a curse of God ape, the good Sir Leopold that had for his cognizance the flower of quiet, margarine gentle, advising also that time's occasion is most sacred and most worthy to be most sacred. In Horton's house rest should reign. To be short, this passage was scarce by when Master Dixon and Mary Ann Eccles, goodly grinning, asked young Stephen what was the reason why he had not decided to take friar's vows, and he answered him, obedience in the womb, chastity in the tomb, but involuntary poverty all his days. Master Linehan at this made return that he had heard of those nefarious deeds, and how, as he heard thereof counted, he had besmirked the lily virtue of a confiding female, which was corruption of minors, and they all undershowed it too, waxing merry and toasting to his fathership. But he said very entirely it was clean contrary to their suppose, for he was the eternal Son and ever Virgin. Thereat mirth grew in them the more, and they rehearsed to him his curious rite of wedlock for the derobing and deflowering of spouses, as the priests use in Madagascar Island, should to be in guise of white and saffron, her groom and white and grain, with burning of nard and tapers, on a bride bed, while clerks sung cowries in the anthem of noviter sexus omnis corporis mysterium till she was there unmated. He gave them in a much admirable hymen meant by those delicate poets Master John Fletcher and Master Francis Beaumont, that is in their mate's tragedy that was read for like twining of lovers. To bed was the burden of it to be played with echoable consonant upon the virginals. An exquisite dulcet epithalami of most maleficative suadency for juveniles amatory, whom the auriferous flambeaux of the paranymphs have escorted quadrupedal proscenium of connubial communion. Well met they were, said Master Dixon, joyed, but, hark ye, young sir, better were the name Beaumont and Letcher, for, by my troth, of such a mingling much might come. Young Stephen did to his best remembrance they had but the one doxy between them, and she of the stews to make shift within delight. Sam's life ran very high in those days, and the custom of the country approved with it. Greater love than this, he said, no man hath a man laid down his wife for his friend. Go thou and do likewise. Thus, or words to that effect, saith Zarathustra, sometime register French letters to the University of Oxtail, nor breathed there ever that man to whom mankind was more beholden. Bring a stranger within thy tower, it will go hard, but thou wilt have second best bed. Orate, fratres, pro ipso. And all the people shall say, Amen. Remember, Aaron, thy generations and thy days of old, how thou saidst little by me and by my word, and broughtest in a stranger to my gates to commit fornication in my sight, and to wax fat and kick like Jeshurun. Therefore hast thou sinned against my light, and hast made me, thou Lord, to be the slave of his servant. Return, Clan Millie, forget me not, O Milesian. Why hast thou done this abomination before me, that thou didst spurn me for a merchant of Jalaps, and didst deny me to the Roman and to the Indian of dark speech, with whom thy daughters did lie luxuriously? Look forth now, my people, upon the land of behest, even from her ebb and from the bow, and from the horns of Hatton into a land flowing with milk and money. But thou hast suckled me with a bitter milk, my moon and my sun thou hast quenched forever. And thou hast left me alone forever in the dark ways of my bitterness, and with a kiss of ashes hast thou kissed my mouth. This tenebrosity of the interior, he proceeded to say, hath not been illumined by the wit of the Septuagint, not so much as mentioned, for the Orient from on high which brake hell's gate visited a darkness that was thoranious. The self-action minerates atrocities, as Tully saith of his darling Stokes, and Hamlet his father showeth the prince noblest her of combustion. The daffin in the noon of life is in Egypt's plague, which nights of pre-nativity and post-mortemity is their most proper ubi and quomodo. And as the ends and ultimates of all things accord in some mean and measure with their inceptions and originals, that same multiplicit concordance which leads forth growth from birth, accomplishing by retrogressive metamorphosis that diminishing an ablation towards the final which is agreeable unto nature, so is it with our subsolar being. The aged sisters draw us into life, We wail, batten, spar, clip, clasp, sunder, dwindle, die, over us dead they bend. First, saved from waters of old Nile, among bulrushes, a bed of frost-shaded wattles, at last the cavity of a mountain, an occulted sepulchre amid the conclamation of the hill-cat and the ossifrage. And as no man knows the ubicity of his tumulus nor to what processes we shall thereby be ushered, nor whether to Tophet or to a Denville, and the like way is all hidden when we would backward see from what region of remoteness the wetness of our wantness hath fetched his wentness. To punch Costello or that mainly Eddie and Chanson, but he loudly bid them, lo, wisdom hath built herself a house, this vast majestic long-established vault, the crystal palace of the crater, all in a plebeian order, and for him who finds the P. Behold the mansion reared by thee, though Jack see them all stored in many a refluent sack, in the proud circuit of Jack John's bivouac. A black cracked noise in the street here, Alec, bawled back. Loud on left Thor thundered, and anger awful the hammer hurler. Came now the storm that hissed his heart, and Master Lynch bade him have a care to fall out and wit wanton, as the god self was angered for his help-rate and beginnery. And he that had erst challenged to be so doughty waxed wan as they might all mark and shrank together, and his pitch that was before so hot uplift was now with a sudden quiet plucked down, and his heart shook within the cage of his breast as he tasted the rumor of that storm. Then did some mock and sneer and punch Costello fell hard again to his yell, which Master Lenehan vowed he would do after, and he was indeed but the word in the blow on any of his color. But the braggart boaster cried that an old nobody was in his cups that was much indifferent, and he would not lag behind his lead. But this was only to die his desperation, as cowed he crouched and horns howl. He drank indeed at one draught to pluck up a heart of Enigris, or thundered long rumblingly over all the heavens, so that Master Madden, being godly certain whiles, knocked him on his ribs upon that crack of doom, and Master Bloom, at the braggart's side, spoke to him calming words to slumber his great fear, advertising how it was no other thing but a hump of noise that he heard, the discharge of fluid from the thunderhead, look you, having taken place, in all of the order of the natural phenomenon, but was young boaster's fear vanquished by calmer's words? No, for he had in his bosom a spite named bitterness which could not by words be done away. And was he then neither calm like the one nor godly like the other? He was neither as we must have liked to be either. But could he not have endeavored to have found again as in his youth the bottle of holiness that then he lived withal? Indeed no, for grace was not there to find that bottle. Heard he then in that clap the voice of the god bring forth, or, what Calmer said, a hubbub of phenomenon? Heard. Why, he could not but hear unless he had plugged him up the tube understanding, which he had not done. For through that tube, he saw that he was in the land of phenomenon, where he must for certain one day die as he was like the rest to a passing show. And would he not accept to die like the rest and pass away? By no means would he, though he must, nor would he make more shows, according as men do with wives, which phenomenon has commanded them to do by the book law. Then what did he not of that other land which is called Believe on Me, that is the land of promise which behoves to the king delightful, and shall be forever, where there is no death, no birth, neither wiving nor mothering, which all shall come as many as believe on it? Yes. Pius had told him of that land, and Chase had pointed to the way, but the reason was that in the way he fell in with a certain horror of an eye-pleasing exterior, whose name, she said, is Bird in the Hand, and she beguiled him wrong ways from the true path by her flatteries, that she said to him as, "Ho, you pretty man, turn aside hither, and I will show you a place." And she lay at him so flatteringly that she had him in her growth, which is named too in the bush, or by similar carnal concupiscence. This was what all that company that sat there at commons and massive mothers the most lusted after, and if they met with this hollow Bird in the Hand, which was within all foul plagues, monsters, and a wicked devil, they would strain the last, but they would make with her and mow her. For regarding Believe on Me, they said it was no notion, and they could conceive no thought of it, for First, two in the bush with their test, and was the very goodliest growth, and then it were 4 pillows on which were 4 tickets with these words printed on them: "Took back and topsy-turvy and sham face and cheek by Jalen." Second, for that foul plague all pox and the monsters that cared not for them preservative had given them a stout shield of ogs and gut end. Third, that they might take no hurt neither from offspring that was that wicked devil by virtue of the same shield which was named Killchild. So were they all in their blind fancy, a Mr. Cavill and Mr. Sometimes Godly, a Mr. Ape Swimble, a Mr. Falls Franklin, a Mr. Danny Dixon, a young boastering Mr. Cautious Calmer. Wherein, O wretched company, were ye all deceived? For that was the voice of the God who was in a very grievous rage that he would lift his arm up and spill their souls for their abuses and their spillings done by them contrariwise to his word forth to bring brandingly death. So Thursday 16th June Pat Diglum laid enclave in apoplexy, and after hard drought, please God, rained, a bargain coming in by water of 50 mile or thereabout with turf, saying the seed won't sprout. Fields at thirst, very sad colored and stung mightily, the quags and tofts too. Hard to breathe, and all the young quicks cling consumed, that sprinkled this long while back as no man remembered to be without. The rosy buds all gone brown and spread out blobs, and on the hills naught but dry flag and faggots that would catch at first fire. All the world saying, for aught they knew, the big wind of last February, a year that'd have up the land, so paid a small thing beside this barrenness. But by and by, they said, this evening after sundown, the wind sitting in the west, biggish swollen clouds to be seen as the night increased, and the weather-wise pouring up at them, and some sheet lightnings at first and after, past 10 o'clock, one great stroke with a long thunder, and in the brace of shakes all scamper pell-mell within door for the smoking shower, the men making shelter for their straws with a cloud kerchief, women folks skipping off with curdles catched up soon as the pour came. In Illy Place, Bagot Street, Zook's Lawn, thence through Marion Green up to Hull Street, a swash of water flowing that was before bonnetery, and not one chair or coach or figure seen about, but no more crack after that first. Over against the Right Honorable Mr. Justice Fitzgibbon's door, that is to sit with Mr. Hill the lawyer upon the college lands, Mulligan, a gentleman's gentleman that had but come from Mr. Moore's the writer's, that was a papish but is now, folks say, good William might chance against Alec Bannon and the cut bob, which are now in with dance cloaks of Kendall Green, that was new got to town from Mullinger with the stage where his cousin Mal M's brother will stay a month yet till Saints within him asks what in the earth he does there. He bound home, and he to Andrew Horns being stayed for to crush a cup of wine, so he said, but would tell him of a skittish heifer, big of rage and beef for the hill, and all this will poured with rain, and so both together on the horns. There lay up Bloom of Crawford's journal, sitting stuck with the covey of wags, likely brangling fellows, Dixon John, scholar of My Lady of Mercy's, Vin Lynch, a Scots fellow, Will Madden, heel in a hand, very sad about a racer he fancied, and Stephen Delia. Bloom there for a languor he had, but was now better, be having dreamed tonight a strange fancy of his dame Mrs. Mall with red slippers on and a pair of turkey trunks, which is thought by those in ken to be for a change, and Mistress Purefoy there, that God through pleading her belly, and now on the stools. Poor body, 2 days past her term, the midwives some were put to it and can't deliver. She queasy for a bowl of rice slope that is a shrewd dryer up of the insides, and her breath very heavy, more than good, and should be a bull-eye boa from the knocks, they say, but God give her soon issue. 'Tis her 9th chick to live, I hear, and Lady Adair bit off her last chick's snails that was in a 12 month, and with other 3 all breastfed and died, written out in a fair hand in the King's Bible. Her hub 50 odd in the Methodist, but takes the sacrament, and isn't to be seen any fair Sabbath with a pair of his boys off Bullock Harbor dapping on the sound with a heavy brake reeler and a punt he is trailing for flounder and pollock, and catches a fine bag, I hear, and some an infinite great fall of rain, and all refreshed, and will much increase the harvest. Yet those in Kent say after when water fire shall come for a prognostication of Malachi's almanac, and I hear that Mr. Russell has done a prophetical charm with the same just out of the Hindustanish for his Farmer's Gazette. They have 3 things in all, but this a mere fetch without bottom reason for old crones and barons, yet sometimes they are found in the right guess with their queries, no telling how. With this came up Lenehan to the table to say how the letter was in that night's Gazette, and he made a show to find it about him, for he swore with an oath that he had been at pains about it. But on Stephen's persuasion he gave over the search, and was bidden to sit nearby, which he did mighty brisk. He was a kind of sport gentleman that went for a merry and drew honest pickle, and what belonged of women, horse flesh or hot scandal he had up pat. To tell the truth, he was mean in fortunes, and for the most part hankered about the coffee houses and low taverns with crim ostlers, bookies, piles men, runners, flat caps, waistcoaters, ladies of the bagnio, and other rogues of the game, or with a chanceable catch bowl or tips taff often at nights till broad day, of whom he picked up between his sack possets much loose gossip. He took his ordinary out of boiling cooks, and if he had but gotten into him a mess of broken victuals or a platter of trips with a bare tester in his purse, he could always bring himself off of the tongue. Some randy quip he had from a punk or whatnot, that every mother's son of them would burst their sides. The other, Costello that is, hearing this talk, asked, was it poetry or a tale? Faith, no, he says. Frank, that was his name. 'Tis all about carrying cows that are to be butchered along of the plank. But they can go hang, says he with a wink, for me with a bull of beef, a pox on it. There's as good fish in this tin as ever came out of it, and very friendly he offered to take us some salty sprats that stood by, which he had officially in the meantime, and found the place, which was indeed the chief design of his embassy, as he was sharp set. More ovaches, says Franklin, in the French language, that had been indentured to a brandy's hipper that has a window lodge in Bordeaux, and he spoke French like a gentleman too. From a child this Frank had been it, and out that his father, Hebrew, who could ill keep him to school to learn his letters and the use of the globes, matriculated at the university to study the mechanics. He took the bit between his teeth like a raw colt, and was more familiar with the justiciary and the parish beadle than with his volumes. One time he would be a play actor, then a sutler or a welsher, then naught would keep him from the barpit and the cocking mane, then he was for the ocean's ear to hoof on the roads with the Romney folk, kidnapping esquires there by favor of moonlight, or fecking maids linen, or choking chicken behind a hedge. He had been off as many times as a cat has lives, and back again with naked pockets as many more, to his father Hebrew, who shed a pine of tears as often as he saw him. What, says Mr. Leopold with his hands across, that was earnest to know the drift of it, will they slaughter all? I protest I saw them but this day morning going to the Liverpool boats, says he. I can scarce believe 'tis so bad, says he. And he had experience of the like brood beasts and offspringers, greasy hoggets and weather wool, having been some years before actuary for Mr. Joseph Cuff, a worthy salesmaster that drove his trade for livestock and meadow orchard by Mr. Gavin Lowell's yard in Prussia Street. I question with you there, says he. More like 'tis the hoose or the timber tongue. Mr. Stephen, a little moved but very handsomely, told him no such matter, and that he had dispatches from the Emperor's chief Telticla thanking him for the hospitality, that was sending over Dr. and Derpist, the best quoted co-catcher in all Muscovy, with a bolus or two of physic to take the bull by the horns. Come, come, says Mr. Vincent, plain dealing. He'll find himself on the horns if he meddles with a bull that's Irish, says he. Irish by nature, says Mr. Stephen, and he sent the ale purling about, an Irish bull in an English china shop. I conceive you, says Mr. Dixon. It is that same bull that was sent to our island by Farmer Nicholas, the bravest cattle breeder of them all, with an emerald ring in his nose. "True for you," says Mr. Vincent across the table, "and a bullseye in the bargain," says he, "and a plumper and a portlier bull," says he, "never shit on Shamrock. He had horns galore, a coat of cloth of gold, and a sweet smoky breath coming out of his nostrils, so that the women of our island, leaving doughballs and rolling pins, followed after him, hanging his bullines and designs." "What for that?" says Mr. Dixon. But before he came over Farmer Nicholas, there was a eunuch at him properly guarded by a college of doctors who were no better off than himself. "So be off now," says he, "and do all my cousin German the Lord Harry tells you, and take a farmer's blessing," and with that he slapped his posteriors very soundly. "But the slap and the blessing stood him friend," says Mr. Vincent, "for to make up he taught him a trick worth two of the other, so that maid, wife, a Besson widow to this day affirmed that they would rather any time of month whisper in his ear in the dark of a cow-house or get a lick on the nape from his long holy tongue than lie with the finest strapping young ravisher in the four fields of all Ireland." Another then put in his word, and they dressed him, says he, in a point shift and petticoat with a tippet and girdle and ruffles on his wrists, and clipped his forelock and rubbed him all over with spermacetic oil, and built stables for him at every turn of the road with a gold manger, and each full of the best hay in the market, so that he could doss and dung to his heart's content. By this time the father of the faithful, for so they called him, was grown so heavy that he could scarce walk to pasture. A remedy which our cozening dames and damsels brought him his fodder, and thereupon lapsing, and since his belly was full he would rear up on his hind orders to show the ladyship some mystery, and roar and bellow out of him in bull's language, and they all after him. "Ah," says another, "and so pampered was he that he would suffer not to grow in all the land but green grass for himself, for that was the only color to his mind, and there was a board put up on a hillock in the middle of the island with a printed notice, saying, 'By the Lord Harry, green is the grass that grows on the ground.' And," says Mr. Dixon, "if ever he got scent of a cattle or a scommon or the wilds of Connemara, or a husbandman in Sligo that was sowing as much as a handful of mustard or a bag of rapeseed, he'd run amok over half the countryside, rooting up with his horns whatever was planted, and all by Lord Harry's orders. There was bad blood between them at first," says Mr. Vincent, "and the Lord Harry called Farmer Nicholas all the old nicks in the world, and an old horror master that kept 7 truels in his house, and I'll meddle in his matters," says he. "I'll make that animal smell hell," says he, "with the help of that good pizzle my father left me." But one evening, says Mr. Dixon, when the Lord Harry was cleaning his royal pail to go to dinner after winning a boat race, he had spade hours for himself, but the first rule of the chorus was that the others were to row pitchforks. He discovered in himself a wonderful likeness to a bull, and on picking up the black-thumbed chapbook that he kept in the pantry, he found sure enough that he was a left-handed descendant of the famous champion bull of the Romans, Boss Bourbon, which is good Borgo Latin for boss of the show. After that, says Mr. Vincent, the Lord Harry put his head into a cow's drink and trough in the presence of all his courtiers, and pulling it out again told them all his new name. Then, with the water running off him, he got into an old smock-and skirt that had belonged to his grandmother, and bought a grammar of the bull's language to study, but he could never learn a word of it except the first personal pronoun, which he copied out and got off by heart, and if ever he went out for a walk he filled his pockets with chalk to write it upon what took his fancy, the side of the rock, a tea house table, or a bale of cotton, or a cork float. In short, he and the bull of Ireland were soon as fast friends as an arse and a shirt. They were, says Mr. Stephen, and the end was that the men of the island, seeing no help was toward, as the ungreat women were all of one mind, made a wary raft, loaded themselves in their bundles of chattels on shipboard, set all masts erect, manned the yards, sprang the luff, heaved to, spread 3 sheets in the wind, put her head between wind and water, weighed anchor, ported her helm, ran up the Jolly Roger, gave 3 times 3, let the bulging run, pushed off in their bumboat and put a sea to recover the Maine of America. Which was the occasion, says Mr. Vincent, of the composing by boatswain of that rollicking chanty, Pope Peter's but a piece of bed. A man's the man for a' that. Our worthy acquaintance Mr. Malachi Mulligan now appeared in the doorway as the students were finishing their apologue, accompanied with a friend whom he had just encountered, a young gentleman, his name Alec Bannon, who had late come to town, it being his intention to buy a color or a cornetcy in the Finchables and list for the wars. Mr. Mulligan was civil enough to express some relish of it all the more as it jumped at the project of his own for the cure of the very evil that had been touched on. Whereat he handed round to the company a set of pasteboard cards which he had printed that day at Mr. Quayle's, bearing the legend printed in fair italics, Mr. Malachi Mulligan. Fertilizer and incubator. Lambay Allen. His project, as he went on to expound, broke off from the round of vital pleasures that just formed the chief business of Sir Fopling Pippenjay and Sir Milksop Quietnock in town, and to devote himself to the noblest task for which our bodily organism has been framed. Well, let us hear of it, good my friend, said Mr. Dixon. I make no doubt it smacks of wenching. Come, be seated, both. 'Tis as cheap sitting as standing. Mr. Mulligan accepted of the invitation and, expatiating upon his design, told his hearers that he had been led into this thought by a consideration of the causes of sterility, both the inhibitory and the prohibitory, whether the inhibition in its turn were due to conjugal vexations or to a parsimony of the balance, as well as whether the prohibition proceeded from defects congenital or from proclivities acquired. It grieved him plaguingly, he said, to see the nuptial couch defrauded of its dearest pledges, and to reflect upon so many agreeable females with rich jointures, a prey to the vilest bonzes, who hide their flambeau under a bushel of uncongenial cloister, or lose their womanly bloom in the embraces of some unaccountable muskin, when they might multiply the inlets of happiness, sacrificing the inestimable jewel of their sex when 100 pretty fellows were at hand caress. This, he assured them, made his heart weak. To curb this inconvenience, which he concluded due to a suppression of latent heat, having advised with certain counsellors of worth and inspected into this matter, he had resolved to purchase and free simple for ever the field of Lambay Island from its holder, Lord Talbot de Malahide, a Tory gentleman of note much in favour with our ascendancy party. He proposed to set up there a national fertilizing farm to be named Unfalos, with an obelisk hewn and erected after the fashion of Egypt, and to offer his dutiful yeoman services for the fecundation of any female of what grade of life soever who should there direct to him with the desire of fulfilling the functions of her natural. Money was no object, he said, nor would he take a penny for his pains. The poorest kitchen wench, no less than the opulent lady of fashion, if so be their constructions and their tempers were warm pursuiters for their petitions, would find in him a man. For his nutriment he shewed how he would feed himself exclusively upon a diet of savoury tubercles and fish and conies there, the flesh of these latter prolific rodents being highly recommended for his purpose, both broiled and stewed with a blade of mace and a pot of capsicum chilies. After this homily, which he delivered with much warmth of asseveration, Mr. Mulligan and had Trice put off from his hat a kerchief with which he had shielded it. Both, it seems, had been overtaken by the rain, for all of their mending their pace had taken water, as might be observed by Mr. Mulligan's small clothes of a hodden grey, which was now somewhat piebald. His project meanwhile was very favourably entertained by his auditors, and won hearty eulogies from all them. Mr. Dixon of Mary's accepted to it, asking with a finicking air that he purpose also to carry coals to Newcastle. Mr. Mulligan, however, made court to the scholarly by an apt quotation from the classics which, as it dwelt upon his memory, seemed to him a sound and tasteful support of his contention. Talus a tanta deprivatio hui seculi, o quirits, ut matters familiarum nostrae lascivus cogestly bet semiveri labici titillationes tessus ponderosus et excelsus erectione bicenturionum rembinorum magnoper and teponum, while for those of ruder wit drove home his point by analogies of the animal kingdom more suitable to their stomach, the buck and doe of the forest glade, the farm-yard drake and duck. Valuing himself not a little upon his elegance, being indeed a proper man of person, this talkative now applied himself to his dress with animadversions of some heat upon the sudden whimsy of the atmospherics, while the company lavished their encomiums upon the project he had advanced. The young gentleman, his friend, overjoyed as he was at a passage that had late befallen him, could not forbear to tell it his nearest neighbor. Mr. Mulligan, now perceiving the table, asked for whom were those loaves and fishes, and, seeing the stranger, he made him a silver bow and said, "Pray, sir, was you in need of any professional assistance we could give you?" Upon his offer, thanked him very heartily, though preserving his proper distance, and replied that he was come there about a lady, now an inmate of Horn's house, that was in an interesting condition, poor body, from woman's woe, and here he fetched a deep sigh, to know if her happiness had yet taken place.